Teamwork is strength! Game's up. Fun's over.
As one with wind and cloud.
Out of the frying pan! Gotcha. Take it easy.
Hey y'all, welcome to my Yelan guide as of Genshin Impact 3.7. Yelan is an amazing support that can apply Hydro while doing massive amounts of damage, all the while buffing your entire team's damage along with it. Yes, you might have thought that she was just a second Xingqiu at first, but if you really think that, then yeah, listen to yourself. She's a premium version of one of the best 4-star characters in the game, so calling her a second Xingqiu is one of the best compliments a character can have. Regardless, I'll be covering everything you need to know about Yelan, so without any more delays, let's untangle this wire. Starting off, Yelan's talents and what they do. Her normal attack, yeah, ignore the white damage. That won't do anything meaningful. The real number to pay attention to is this one. This is called a Breakthrough Barb, a variant of Yelan's charged attack that scales off of her max HP instead of attack, as is the case for the rest of the scalings on this talent. You can use her Breakthrough Barbs after you gain the Breakthrough state on Yelan. You'll know if Yelan is in her Breakthrough state if her bracelet is glowing. So how do you get that bracelet to glow? Well, there are two ways to do so. One is by being outside of combat for 5 or more seconds. The second way is by linking enemies with her elemental skill, which I'll get to in a bit, but for each enemy you link with her skill, you have a 34% chance of Yelan going into the state. The barb itself does some pretty alright damage, but it's not going to make enough of a difference for it to be worth looking out for. Moving on to Yelan's elemental skill, Lingering Lifeline. Lingering Lifeline puts Yelan in a dash state where she can mark enemies to explode after she ends her skill, doing hydro damage based on her max HP. This ability has press and hold variants that both have the same cooldown. If you press it, she goes forward a certain distance and ends the skill immediately. If you hold it, she will instead go into a continuous run where she has increased interruption resistance and can go for a maximum of 3 seconds. I should also note that enemies that are light enough will be knocked back towards Yelan after the Lingering Lifeline ends, for some slight crowd control. To end the skill early, you can jump, tap her skill again, sprint, use a normal attack, or just get knocked out of it. This still makes whatever enemies you've marked take damage, even though you ended it early. There can be some reasons as to why you'd prefer pressing it or holding it, but it mostly just comes down to the number of enemies you want to hit. If you're only fighting one enemy, it's better to press the skill. On the other hand, if you're fighting multiple enemies, you may as well just hold the skill to hit as many of them as you can, as to do more damage to more enemies and reset your breakthrough state, if that is something you want to do. Now let's go over Yelan's burst, Depth Clarion Dice. Upon casting, it will deal AoE hydro damage based on her max HP, and summons a dice called the Exquisite Throw. The Exquisite Throw will fire off 3 arrows that also deal hydro damage based on her max HP whenever your active character uses a normal attack or when she uses her skill to cause an enemy to explode. This is the reason why Yelan is often compared to Xingqiu, as both their bursts will do hydro damage alongside your normal attacks. But there is one major part of this ability that I'll get back to in a second. Depth Clarion Dice makes up the bulk of Yelan's gameplay, as it not only applies hydro quickly, but it does so while dishing out a lot of damage. The burst itself costs 70 energy, which can make Yelan decently energy hungry, and Exquisite Throw will stay active for 15 seconds with an 18-second cooldown to cast it again. Time for the passives. First up is her Ascension 1 passive, Turn Control. Depending on how many elements you have in your party, Yelan will gain a burst to her max HP of 6%, 12%, 18%, or 30%. This serves as a nice buff to both her damage and survivability. Yelan's 4th Ascension passive, Adapt with Ease, is incredibly broken. After using Yelan's burst and gaining the Exquisite Throw, what this passive does is increase the damage your active character does. The increase initially starts at 1%, going up by 3.5% every second, capping out at 50%. This buff is then removed when your burst duration ends and restarts once it is cast again. This passive can be extremely valuable since it's a damage increasing passive that increases over time. Think of it as Mona's Omen, but instead it's over time, on top of Yelan's already crazy damage output and hydro application. Now that you know what Yelan's talents do, which one should you prioritize leveling? Start with her burst first, as it is the largest increase to her personal damage. Second is her skill. Again, big damage. Last is her normal attack talent. While the Breakthrough Barb is on the normal attack scaling, it is not worth leveling over the other two and gives an inconsistent source of damage at best. Let's now move on to how you can build her to crack her the f*** out. Before we dive into artifact sets and stats, if you want to maximize Yelan's damage as much as possible, leveling her to 90 is the first thing you should do. Since Yelan mainly scales with max HP, that will be the biggest increase at a base level. Now, let's actually go into artifacts. Let's start with the sets first. Yelan's overall best set is the 4-set Emblem of Severed Fate. Not only does this set help with her steep energy recharge requirement, which I'll come back to in a second, but also rewards her with more damage the more recharge she has. Even if you are building your teams to better help with Yelan's energy, this is still a very strong set for her. Other alternative sets are pairs of 2 sets of energy recharge, HP percent, or hydro damage. They all offer similar value to one another. Granted, nowhere close to 4-set Emblem, but on your way to farming that, these are your next best options. Now let's go over the stats you want on your artifacts. Yelan is particularly easier to build than other characters since the damage on her relevant abilities purely scale on HP. Seeing as that is the case, use an HP Sands, Hydro Damage Goblet, and a Crit Circlet, whichever crit you have less of. An Energy Recharge Sands can be an option if you're not able to get her burst up at the start of every team rotation, since Yelan's burst is her biggest strength. That said, if you're able to burst every rotation without an ER Sands, use an HP one instead to boost her damage. Also, a case can be made for an HP Circlet if you have one and can meet crit thresholds in your substats. HP percent comes out to be slightly behind, or in some cases, just as good as crit percent in terms of damage, so see what works better for you. For substats, prioritize energy recharge up until you can burst every rotation, then HP percent or crit percent, since they both give equal value. In terms of Yelan's energy recharge requirement, it can widely vary through multiple factors: her teammates, her weapon, how many times you're using her skill in a rotation, and so on. When I say widely, I mean sometimes up to 100% in range. Building for more energy recharge can also mean that her damage output goes down, but with all that in mind, the general working range of ER for Yelan is somewhere in between 200 to 260% if you're using her as the only Hydro character on your team and without an ER weapon. But this is pretty much the upper range and something you shouldn't really need to resort to. A more likely range is 160 to 200%, as long as you're using Favonius Warbow or pairing her with someone like Xingqiu that can also help her with energy. Again though, this still depends on how you play her and your team rotations. Now that you've got a pretty good idea of the artifacts you want on Yelan, what weapon should you use? Yelan generally prefers weapons that have energy recharge, crit, or HP on them. I'll be going back to the cheapest option and moving up, but let's start with one of the best that's also free: the Favonius Warbow. Favonius Warbow not only gives a 61.3% energy recharge substat when leveled to 90, but also extra energy particles if you crit. This weapon helps with Yelan's energy requirement immensely, up to the point of only needing to use this weapon plus the 2-set bonus from Emblem of Severed Fate to fulfill it. Not only that, but this weapon is given to you for free after completing the Mondstadt Archon quest, all making this one of the best weapons for Yelan. Now, starting back at the bottom and moving up. I don't have a recurve bow. For 3-star options, Recurve Bow and Slingshot are decent. Recurve Bow can be obtained from chest and Mondstadt and offers an HP substat, while Slingshot can give Yelan a nice boost in crit rate. Moving back up, in terms of other 4-star options, we have Sacrificial Bow, Stringless, and Moon's Moon. Sacrificial lets you use her skill twice to sort of fix her energy hunger, but ultimately worse than Favonius overall. Stringless gives her an elemental mastery and a passive that buffs both elemental skill and burst damage, improving her overall damage. Moon's Moon has a useless secondary stat to Yelan, but buffs burst damage depending on the party's total energy cost for their bursts. Because the attack percent stat on Moon's Moon is useless, you don't need to level it at all, but you do need to rely on refines to make it better. Before we get into the 5-star options, I'll just say this here. The Favonius Warbow is your best 4-star option to maximize both her damage and elemental burst uptime, especially if you're using 4-set Emblem of Severed Fate. I may have listed some other options just now, but to be honest, throw those out the window unless you can meet her energy requirement through your artifacts. All of them pale in comparison to the Favonius Warbow. Moving on to the 5-star options, you have 2 that can come out on top of or equal to using Favonius, and those are the Aqua Simulacra and the Elegy for the End. Both of these are pretty comparable options to one another, but will ultimately depend on how you want to look at them. Do you want Yelan to kill stuff faster, or do you want her to buff your team so that they can kill enemies faster? Aqua Simulacra will be Yelan's situational best in terms of her solo damage. Not only does it have an 88.2 crit damage stat, but it also gives the wielder additional HP percent in the passive as well as a flat damage buff if you're close to an enemy. Aqua Simulacra will give Yelan the highest damage output and will be her best weapon if you are able to use her burst on cooldown. On the other hand, Elegy for the End gives similar value to the Aqua Simulacra, but instead of personal damage, it improves team damage. It has a high energy recharge secondary stat, and what it does is, after you hit an enemy with a skill or burst 4 times, your team will get a buff to their attack as well as elemental mastery for 12 seconds, then go on a 20-second cooldown. Great for improving Yelan's role as a support character that can buff your carry or reaction driver. To wrap up the weapon section, Yelan has some amazing options that make her better at filling certain roles depending on which one you pick, with the great bonus of Favonius Warbow, a contender even against the 5-star options, being completely free. With the build all said and done with, let's talk about Yelan's Constellations and if the upgrades are worth rolling the dice for. Just about all of Yelan's Constellations make her better at her job as a Hydro support, or if they don't, they make her do a boatload more damage. So let's go through them. C1 gives Yelan an extra use of her elemental skill. This might just sound pretty small, but oh no, this one can mean a lot for her. Not only does using her skill again mean she's doing extra damage, but it also means you're generating another set of particles for her, which can greatly lower the amount of energy recharge you actually need to build on her, making this constellation incredibly valuable should you pull for it. As a bonus, it also means that you can run faster in the overworld for another 3 seconds, so there's some value in it for world exploration as well. C2 makes her burst fire off another arrow that deals a flat 14% of her max HP that can happen every 1.8 seconds, or in practice, every other normal attack you do with your active character. This strengthens her Hydro application ability as well as giving extra damage. C3 and 5 increase burst and skill talent levels respectively. C4 increases the max HP of everyone in your party depending on how many enemies are marked with a lifeline from her skill, giving 10% per enemy up to 40%. This is a nice constellation to have as it increases Yelan's damage and your party's survivability. This can also serve as a nice buff to any other character that scales on HP. Another thing to note is that you don't have to get all the stacks in one skill usage. You can just max out this constellation by linking 4 enemies through using her skill twice, courtesy of C1. Lastly, C6 turns Yelan into a mini bazooka. Straight up. One of, if not the best 5-star C6 characters in the game. Now, why is that? Yelan's 6th constellation puts her into the mastermind state and gives her these super breakthrough barbs on her normal attacks after she uses her burst. These breakthrough barbs do 1.5 times the damage of a regular breakthrough barb over using the one from her charged attack. The mastermind state either lasts 20 seconds or after she fires 5 arrows, as these super breakthrough barbs scale at 1.5 times the regular ones from the normal attack talent. If you have C6, Yelan's talent priority changes to normal attack first, burst second, skill third. This also allows her to change her build a little bit should you want to. With C6 in mind, the option of 4-set Heart of Depth is actually not a bad one, since her super breakthrough barbs are still considered charged attacks, so they get the buff from the set bonus. However, 4-set Emblem remains a very good choice since Yelan still wants energy recharge, but the other option does open up to you. Something else to note about this constellation, even if these super breakthrough barbs are considered charged attacks, they will still activate the exquisite throw coordinated attacks from her burst. So yeah, this constellation is broken. To conclude on Yelan's constellations, they are all very worth going for should you decide to, all giving her either a boost to her damage or ease of use via her C1. By no means whatsoever do you have to, but should you decide to, you will not be disappointed. Before I dive into what teams Yelan is good in, let's talk about pre-funneling energy into her. Earlier I said that Yelan can have a lot of energy problems if you're not careful about how you build or play her. Well, there is a small workaround that you can use. You can pre-funnel energy into Yelan by using her skill and immediately using her burst afterwards. This is common good practice for most characters, but can save Yelan especially, and even more so when combined with the Favonius Warbo's passive and 2-set emblem effect. Now, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't build any recharge on her, but can be a helpful tip to keep in mind for smoother rotations. Now let's go into her teams. Yelan is a Hydro character. Shocker. But this means that she can be really flexible with the teams that she's good in, especially if you're using Hydro-based reactions. These teams include, but are not limited to, Vaporize, Double Hydro, Bloom, Hyper Bloom, Burgeon, Taser, and Freeze. Vaporize is pretty self-explanatory. Pair her with a pyro carry like Hu Tao, Yoimiya, or D-Luke, or could just be Shengling. Then, 2 supports that can be what your carry prefers. Double Hydra is using her with Xingqiu so they can both generate particles for each other as well as giving Hydra resonance so as to buff any HP scaling characters. The mold of this plus Hu Tao and Zhongli makes this team setup one of the best in the game for single target vaporized damage, but you can use the mold for other reactions. In terms of Dendro related teams, Yelan can fit nicely into any Bloom, Hybrid Bloom, or Burgeon teams. Just slot in a Dendro character like Nahida, Yao Yao, Dendro main character, Kale, really any Dendro character works. Then the triggers for each respective reaction, Bloom being Nilou, Hyper Bloom being any electro character built on EM like Raiden or Shinobu, and Burgeon being characters like Toma or Dia if you want to. Taser is using her with electro characters to use electro charged. This team doesn't particularly rely on the reaction itself to do damage, but rather the raw scaling of the characters in the party. Good teammates for this are Fischl, Beidou, and an animal slot in like Sucrose, Venti, or Kazuha. Yelan can also play in the freeze archetype. Although not being the best option for it, she can still work. Overall, Yelan is very flexible due to being Hydro and can slot into most if not every team. Let's wrap up this video. Yelan is an amazing character. Not only does she deserve the praise of being called a second version of one of the best characters in the game, mirroring Xingqiu's ability to apply Hydra from off-field, but also adds in her own spice via the damage boost from her 4th Ascension passive, Adapt with Ease. Yelan has a wide range of teams that she can fit into due to enabling Hydro-related reactions. She's got a pretty simple building process because she scales purely with HP, and although she can have a very steep requirement for energy in certain scenarios, you can often make up for that weakness very easily. Not only that, but Yelan's Constellations can be very valuable upgrades that make her just that much stronger at her role. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back for another video. See ya.